I was recently over in Europe and actually on a train between Hudiksvall and Stockholm. The Lord spoke to me, and this is what He said. He said, "Tell my people that the long-awaited for promises of God that they've given up on, I haven't." And I was so blown away when I heard this. It was such an encouragement because all of a sudden things popped up in my head of things I was no longer pressing in for, promises of God I was no longer pressing in for. And I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know that I gave up on them, but I certainly put a bunch on the shelf. And I got really excited about how God was going to begin to break forth on my behalf and on behalf of the body. But then, even as I was thinking this, I could hear the Lord whispering to my heart, and He was saying, it's not that I'm going to begin to break forth. I never stop breaking forth. And He started teaching me about sometimes what happens when we get disappointed and we start to give up. And it's often based on us looking at ourselves instead of Him. You know, how many of us can say that we haven't walked out the promises of God? We haven't walked out our path perfectly. And we'll start to focus on that. We'll start to get discouraged and we'll start giving up because we start looking at our ability to do something as opposed to God's ability to do it. And as I was meditating on this, God brought to mind the story of Peter in John 21. Now, let me give you a quick context. You all know that Peter has denied Christ 3 times in the courtyard, and he runs. We read in Luke that he runs from the courtyard weeping bitterly. Peter's just broken by this. He's so broken by it that he's now given up on everything. Nothing's gone the way that Peter expected it would. And so he ends up denying Christ because he's afraid of getting arrested and scourged and everything that's going on with Christ. He's afraid it's going to happen to him. He denies Christ. He turns away from his calling. He turns away from the promises of God. He turns his back on everything he's been laboring with God for, with Jesus for the last 3 years. And the next time we see him, basically, is he's given up on everything, he's turned his back on his calling and on ministry, and he's gone back to fishing. In the beginning of John 21, he actually says to the other disciples, "I'm going fishing." In other words, he's saying, I'm done with this. I'm done with being confused. I'm done with not understanding. I'm done with walking things out imperfectly. I'm done. I'm going back to fishing. And we know that's what he did before he was called. So he's turned his back on his calling. He's gone back to what he was doing before Jesus ever showed up. And he's so messed up by everything that's happened. Even though he's gone back to the family business that he's been good at his whole life, he now can't even catch fish. The risen Lord shows up in John 21. They don't recognize him yet, but it's the risen Lord. He says, "Hey, how's the fishing going?" And they say, "We haven't caught anything." And he says, "Well, why don't you throw your net out on the other side of the boat?" And when they do, they bring in one of the greatest hauls of fish they've ever seen. All of a sudden, they realize that this is Jesus. It's their Jesus, the risen Lord. And Peter goes jumping in the water, swims to shore, and he has this incredible encounter with Jesus over lunch. And I want to read this to you. It's out of John 21, verses 15 through 19, and this is what it says. After the meal, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," Peter replied. "You know I love you." "Then feed my lambs," Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the question, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord," Peter said. "You know I love you." "Then take care of my sheep," Jesus said. Once more he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved that Jesus asked the question a 3rd time. He said, "Lord, you know everything. You know I love you." Jesus said, "Then feed my sheep." Now, what's interesting to me in this is in English, it's a wonderful interaction between Jesus and Peter, but in the original Greek, it's a powerful, wonderful interaction between Jesus and Peter. Because in English, there's only one word for love. In Greek, there's actually 3 words for love, and 2 different Greek words here are used when Jesus is talking to Peter about love. And I want to start, before we go into that, I want to start and point out the first thing Jesus asked Peter is, "Peter, do you love me more than these?" And I believe the these are the fish that he's being served for the meal. And he's saying, "Do you love me more than these fish? Do you love what I've called you to more than what you're doing?" And Peter says, "Yes, I do." Now, what's key here is that God can call us from anywhere, from anything, and bring us into everything he has promised for us. And it's all through his love. So the two Greek words used in this conversation about love are agape, which is the perfect love of God, and phileo, which is the way man loves. It's not bad, but it's not perfect. That you give and you kind of expect something in return. And this is how the conversation goes in the Greek. Jesus says, Peter, do you agape me? Do you love me perfectly? Do you love you as I love you? And Peter says, Lord, you know that I phileo you. In other words, Lord, you know I don't love you as you love me. You know my love isn't perfect. You know my love is flawed. You know I blew it. You know I denied you. And Jesus says, yep, feed my sheep. Peter, do you agape me? Do you love me perfectly? Lord, you know I phileo you. You know my love is not perfect. That's right, I do. Now tend to my lambs. And then the last time Jesus asks, he says, Peter, do you phileo me? Do you love me imperfectly? And in that moment, Peter's heart breaks because he knows the Lord sees him exactly as he is, sees him as the flawed man that he is. And his heart breaks and he weeps. And he says, Lord, you know I phileo you. And Jesus says, well then, feed my lambs. And what I love about this conversation is what Jesus is doing is pointing out to Peter, I know you. And I'm not disappointed in you. You're disappointed in you, but you're disappointed in you because you think I'm disappointed in you, but I'm not disappointed in you. I love you. And he's reminding him, Peter, how can I be disappointed in you? I'm the one who told you at the Last Supper that you would deny me 3 times. This did not come as a surprise, and I am not disappointed. I am here to remind you that you're called to tend to my lambs and feed my sheep. Now, if you want to turn your back on that and you want to be a fisherman, that's okay because I love you and I'll bless you right where you are. Isn't it interesting that when the risen Lord shows up, he does not say to Peter out in the boat trying to fish, hey, what are you doing? I didn't call you to be a fisherman. Get out of there. He simply says, hey, are you having a hard time not catching any fish? And Peter says, no, I'm not. And what does Jesus do? Jesus radically blesses him in what he's doing right where he is. He gives him one of the greatest hauls of fish he'd ever seen. The risen Lord does not show up to get Peter back on the path of ministry. The risen Lord shows up to get Peter back into the revelation that he's loved because he's loved because he's loved. God's love is perfect even when we're not. God's love is certain even when we're not. Jesus is saying to Peter, hey, I love you because I love you because I love you. You may not love me perfectly, but I love you perfectly. My love is not based on what you do. It's based on who I am. I am not disappointed in you. I am not angry with you. You did not take me by surprise. You have not disqualified yourself because you know what? You were never actually qualified in any way other than I chose you and I love you and I still choose you and I still love you. If you want to be a fisherman, I'll bless you as a fisherman. I just want you to know that I love you. If you want to step back into the ministry call in your life, I'll bless you because I love you. I just want you to know that I love you. It's not about how you perform. It's not about what you do. It's about what I did for you, and in that, the certainty of my love that will fuel you, carry you, equip you, and empower you to step into everything I have for you. Jesus wanted Peter to know that we can't do the works of God. We can't answer the call of God in our own strength. Peter tried that, didn't he? And he failed miserably. He got scared. He got aware of his own humanity, and he got afraid for himself. He got thinking about himself. He got focused on himself. What if I get arrested? What if I get beaten? What if I get scourged? What if I get sent to the cross? I don't want any of that. I don't know him. I don't know him. I don't know him. So Jesus shows up to say, hey, I know you blew it. I told you you'd blow it. But don't be disappointed in yourself. I'm not disappointed. Be convicted, yes, but don't be condemned. I want you to be convicted because in that conviction, I want you to recognize that you can't do what I called you to in your own strength. But here's the good news of the gospel. You don't have to. We don't do what God has called us to in our own strength. We do it in His strength. We don't do what God has called us to earn His love or to get His love. We know we're loved, and in that love we step out into what we've been called to. Peter gets that revelation and he begins his journey to becoming the fulfillment of all the promises over his life. And we see him step into that in the book of Acts. I want you to know whatever you've been through, whatever you've done well, whatever you've done poorly, whatever you've absolutely tripped and stumbled over, the calling of God on your life has not changed. The promises of God have not changed. He has them all waiting for you. If you've gotten discouraged and you've gotten disappointed, what you need to do is sit down, focus on your Jesus, and remember that He loves you no matter what. You haven't disqualified yourself. Your only qualification is in Him. You're still in Him. You haven't stepped out of what He has for you permanently, because He is your door. He is your way. You just focus back in on Him, step back into Him, and you're immediately back into your calling. Just like Peter, the Lord wants you to know this. His plans for you haven't changed. His promises and callings are right there. So take time this week to focus on Him. Let Him pour His love out on you and get excited about the things of God again, because they're about to break through in your life. The promises of God that even you've given up on, He hasn't, and you're going to see Him come forth.